Well, I don't want to totally disregard what Tom just said, so I'll tie it in and then we'll head into an update here on Bradley Manning's trial. And I want to bring up something remarkable that I happened to read from a very beltway blog of people who, several individuals who claim to be self-important people who write lawyerly treatises on what our government is doing and publish them and think that they're very excellent. And so a former Justice Department official on this blog Lawfare, her name is Carrie Cordero, published this thing, and her reaction is pretty nauseating. She said, under the headline, "Why These Leaks Hurt," and she went on, and the reason why, I'll just start reading it, but there's a place I'm going with this that relates to Bradley Manning's proceeding. She said, "For the record, the official measure of how damaging a release of classified information is depends on the level of classification. So for example, the unauthorized disclosure of just one top secret document is asserted by the government to cause, quote, exceptionally grave damage to the national security," end quote. That's actually per Obama's executive order. "But these types of blanket assertions can be unsatisfying. Why, I was asked yesterday, does this type of information really need to be kept secret? To put it plainly, the biggest and perhaps obvious reason is that the more information that is public about how we collect intelligence, the more the adversary will understand the United States' capabilities and therefore be able to thwart them. If the adversary knows that we collect X type of data, that we collect it when it travels through X service provider, and that we collect it in Y or Z format, and that we collect certain information pursuant to a court order which requires a certain legal standard, then the adversary has the information and therefore power to adapt their own techniques and tradecraft to beat us. And when what they are beating us at is launching a terrorist attack, for example, then why in the world would we want to give them that advantage?" I think that's fair enough. So let me read you what the prosecutor said in the opening argument of Bradley Manning's trial, and then I think you might recognize some similarity in the reactionary zeal of the emotion that these individuals are conveying, both for the national security state, but then also for going after individuals who think the public has a right to know certain information. The evidence will show, this is not a case about an accidental spill of classified information. This is not a case about a few documents left in a barracks with you. This is not a case about a government official who made discrete, targeted disclosures of classified information based on content. This, Your Honor, this is a case about a soldier who systematically harvested hundreds of thousands of documents from classified databases and then literally dumped that information onto the internet and into the hands of the enemy. Material he knew, based on his training and experience, could put the lives and welfare of his fellow soldiers at risk. And then to continue, as you can get a sense of the character assassination that is brought into the prosecutor's arguments, this is a case about what happens when arrogance meets access to sensitive information. The evidence will show that beginning in November 2009, less than 2 weeks after starting work in the sensitive compartmented information facility, this is a sanitized word for where they work in this intelligence facility, at Bagram, actually that's not right, in Baghdad, Iraq, PFC Manning disregarded the judgment of senior officials, the rules governing the protection of classified information, and his own acknowledged, and it goes on, and as he goes on, he's talking about just the trading and some of the stuff. So anyways, it's a very innocuous, really going and saying that there needs to be this dedication to all the different rules, the legal standards, and it does really overshadow the really profound issues. But what I was really getting at here by comparing the two was just the fact that they're making this case that Manning aided the enemy in the trial, And you heard Jesselyn talk about the dangers of that, so I won't repeat them in their entirety. But what happens if the judge actually thinks there is a valid argument being made by the prosecutors? What happens? What happens if a military convicts a soldier? And then what happens if the Justice Department feels empowered to take that a step further and begin to apply it to civilians, to people in this country? I think it's very easy to go after soldiers for aiding the enemy just because what they're doing is fighting in U.S. wars. So that's not surprising that they would take that jump. But it is, I think, remarkable if they would decide to take that leap and start to go after people for information that these employees aren't dumping themselves. These, the person in the government who's providing this material to Glenn, and same with Bradley Manning, they had the choice. They could have gone to the internet and just put it up somewhere. That is something anybody can do, but they recognize that there's a more responsible way to provide that material to us, and we'll give it to a media organization, and then that media organization can work with the material and analyze it and put context to it, and maybe get official statements from the government to say, this isn't what we're doing, or, well, here's how it really is, which is usually talking points or propaganda, but at the same time, you're getting a larger picture of this dynamic of what these different things that the whistleblower are exposing, what those are to the powerful. A few things that I'll raise just from being there these first few days is, one, that people should keep in mind that the military did not have to proceed with this trial. It is remarkable that they are proceeding with the trial. And they had before them the ability to put this soldier in prison for up to 20 years, dishonorably discharged from the military. He would have been fined, and I guarantee that in multiple circles in the United States, he would have been regarded as a traitor. But for whatever reason inside the military prosecutors' minds and in the offices of the U.S. Army, this is not good enough. They want more. They want him to be convicted as a spy under the Espionage Act. They want him to be treated as someone who has aided the enemy, and they want him to be convicted of stealing the information even though he was working in a facility where he had regular access. So it would be very difficult to make a logical argument that it was stealing to always be able to read this material, as he didn't break anything to get to the material that he was reading on a daily basis. So the other aspect I want to bring into this, as you prepare yourself for this trial that will be lasting throughout the summer, is none of the material is declassified. None of the material that Bradley Manning has confessed to releasing is declassified. So an absurdity sets itself up, and it's particularly evident to someone who's acting as a journalist and going to the proceedings and trying to cover. I know where every single one of these pieces of information are located on the internet, and I can pull them up at any moment, and I can contextualize the process by sharing with you the content, which is what journalists should be doing. We should be talking about the content of Bradley Manning's leaks, more so than how much time he's going to be in prison, and is the prosecutor going to win? Is the argument going to be good or not? What's the legal? I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you get down to the content, that starts to make it questionable that the government is pursuing him and prosecuting him on its own. But back to this thing of the information, of it still being classified. We have this situation where there will be witnesses throughout the process of the trial that are going to be testifying behind closed doors. And they will be testifying about what their opinions are about the release of diplomatic cables, what their opinions are about military incident reports or war logs from Iraq and Afghanistan, what their opinions are about what happened inside of the collateral murder video, the Apache helicopter attack in Baghdad, Iraq. And this will all be classified. This will all be happening behind a closed door, and I won't know anything about it. But the absurdity that when those witnesses go behind closed doors, I will be able to venture a pretty good guess as to what they are saying, because I have that material right here. But what everyone has to understand is that you or I, everyone in this room, might view information as something that we need to stay informed about what government is doing, to make decisions, to decide how we're going to go about engaging in dissent, to decide how we're going to fine-tune our arguments so we can convince people in this country of policies and agendas that we would want to pursue. The government doesn't see it like that. They see information as property. They see information as a commodity that they have control over, and they use words like equity holders to describe the agencies that are involved in the process of handling this trial. And so for them, they have not declassified this material, even though it would make the process more open, fair, and transparent, because they want to keep the control. It doesn't matter to them that we all know what it is. What matters to them is that they can continue to maintain control over the information. The same will be true for Glenn Greenwald, what he's publishing in those newspapers. In fact, I bet Tom would agree that someone in the NSA or any of these intelligence agencies is taking that material and reclassifying it in top secret documents that are reports on the disclosures that are in The Guardian and appearing in all of these newspapers. And then if an employee writes about what was in these newspapers, then he's going to be up for leaking classified information. And it's just this vicious cycle that keeps, it's like a feedback loop that you have with what's happening in government. So I want to bring people into the discussion. I'm going to read a couple more anecdotes here from the trial, because I think you should really get a sense of some of what is happening in the courtroom. I wanted to bring some of that to you. So here's an exchange that happened in the afternoon on June 5th. So this would have been Wednesday. And there was a captain, her name was Captain Casey Fulton, and she was head of the intelligence section where Bradley Manning was working. And I don't know how many of you know, but Bradley Manning was involved in helping with election security for Iraq. He was, you know, I think maybe some of you might have heard about the famous exchange or how he had this transformation when he realized he was turning over detainees that were being tortured to Iraqi federal police. There's also this other incident that David Coombs described now on Christmas Eve in 2009, where apparently they were watching from the facility where he worked a military convoy that was trying to escape enemy fire, and as they were headed down the road, some civilians in a car moved to the side to let the convoy through. The convoy escaped, but the car with 5 civilians inside of it ended up being hit by a roadside bomb. And the civilians inside were wounded severely. One of them died on the way to the hospital. And Bradley was looking around at his fellow officers wondering why they were all celebrating. And none of them were showing any concern for the fact that civilians had died in that incident. And this, according to Coombs, in the trial, transformed him, made him think differently about the military reports he was reading on a daily basis, about civilian casualties, about soldiers dying, about any sort of IED attacks, really rethinking, I think, the relationship that he had to the war in Iraq. And so that's giving you more of a glimpse into what was going on with Manning in Baghdad. This exchange happened on Wednesday. Coombs asked, in the January to May 2010 timeframe, did your unit have any actual knowledge as to which websites enemies went to get information? And Fulton said, I don't remember. Coombs, did you ever remember anything being put out that this particular website is where the enemy goes? Fulton, like their own websites or just websites in general? Coombs, the latter. Fulton, general knowledge that they visit, all sorts of websites seeking information, but Coombs asked, but any actual knowledge as to which websites? And Fulton said, well, for operational security purposes, they were frequently briefed on it, and social networking sites that obviously a lot of people put information on, like Facebook, they've used Google Maps. Potential information where they might go, Coombs asked. Yes. Anything where there's actual confirmation they may go to this website. And Fulton said, Not that I know. Now, the reason why they're having this conversation is because the prosecutor's argument is that soldiers were well aware that they would not give information to WikiLeaks because that is a place that America's enemies go. But as you can see, the word for this conversation is that it is showing this is complete and utter bullshit, that there is no thing to this argument. I mean, just in that conversation, and the fact that as I was sitting there, they put an instructor from information training that Bradley went through on the stand, and he said, I've never heard of WikiLeaks until Bradley Manning was arrested. So I'm just exposing the fact that they don't actually take this website as seriously as, I think it's an isolated group inside the Army that was doing some intelligence threat assessment, and they've blown it up to be this huge thing that the Army took seriously. Most of these soldiers don't even know, nor do they want to know, because most of them think they're going to get AIDS or some kind of really bad virus if they touch a WikiLeaks cable document. I mean, I'm serious. Like, they are paranoid that they're going to be like out of the military if they read a WikiLeaks document. The one other thing I'll read here is that so to wrap up here, what people should also be aware of is that the government is pursuing this argument where they continually bring in Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So in terms of the larger war on information and the larger war on whistleblowing that both Jesselyn and Tom were talking about, the fact is that they aren't going to make it. They don't want to just give Manning agency, that he did this independently, that his own conscience decided to do this, and then he broke the law, and now we'll go after this soldier and we'll hold him accountable for breaking our rules and laws that we take super seriously. We are going to show that he was made to work as a sort of insider for WikiLeaks, and they were having communication with him. And one of the things that they started to do in the first few days is bring people forward, and Coombs went on with an argument, and the judge said, this isn't a dereliction of duty case, Mr. Coombs. Where are you going with your arguments? And he said, government's arguments, ma'am, is somehow that PFC Manning was derelict in his duties because he was somehow working for WikiLeaks instead of doing what he was supposed to be doing. So that's why he was asking questions about this officer that was describing how Manning had been involved in collecting intelligence for going after high-value targets, which are, of course, the people that our government's drones claim to be firing upon. That just gives you a sense that going forward, there are these different larger dynamics that people should look for in the trial. And I will say, in closing, that Bradley Manning could not have gotten a better backdrop from this empire going into his trial. I mean, the fact that going into it, we have seizure of Associated Press phone records, we have James Rosen at Fox News being called a co-conspirator because he took a leak from the State Department employee Stephen Kim, allegedly. The fact that you're hearing all this stuff now around NSA top secret surveillance, and we're at Fort Meade, which is really where the NSA is located. And this is, I think, really good context, and it, I think, has. I'm not going to say that other journalists or media organizations are going to pick up on the importance of the trial. They're not. There are only going to be a few people who are going to be there throughout the entire process. Look for Courthouse News. His name's Adam Klasfeld, and he covers a lot of court cases here in New York City, as I understand. Being at the Stop and Frisk, really staying in the Manhattan court, covering that. The Associated Press has somebody. The Associated Press are actually fighting the military too on the access that they have to cover the process, because we sign these rules when we go and we have to initial and we have to sign these rules, and there's a guy who talks to us every day, and they were told that we've been told we're not supposed to use his name. We're not supposed to tell you who this guy is that's giving us official talking points every single day, and they actually crossed out that section of their rules, and then they initialed it, and basically indicating that they're not going to obey keeping this guy's name private anymore because it's just a nonsense rule. So the AP has been fairly feisty. We've been, they've challenged, and the military police were covering up Bradley Manning. And I don't know, I think this story might be of interest. So to close here, I'll share with you the fact that I don't know if every one of you in this room is aware what happened with the Bradley Manning supporters on Monday. This is a very interesting, quick story just to run through, which shows you how afraid the military is of media attention. I mean, they're really afraid to see these supporters challenging the military and having such a presence. So they brought in a military police officer from off base, as I understand, and he made this decision without asking anyone to have soldiers turn their truth shirts inside out. These are black shirts, they have white letters that say truth. They wear these.
Supporters turn them inside out.
Yeah, they had to turn them out. They were ordered to because, well, first off, they're wearing these shirts because they couldn't wear the Free Bradley Manning shirts, the ones that actually say that on them. So they went to a more subtle shirt, but one that still has power behind it, and they were told to turn these inside out. Well, that's fine to the supporters. I mean, then they can go and talk to press and say the military is having us turn truths inside out, and they can. It was developed intentionally. It was developed intentionally to be able to do this. You can't take truth out of the courtroom, so you can't throw us out for wearing these shirts. But in any case, what was fascinating is just, we're talking about surveillance. So inside, the briefer explained to me that, for one, they had this really ridiculous idea that they were going to keep people from getting into arguments. So they were going to take the shirts and turn them inside out, because if you were sitting next to somebody who was an opponent of Bradley Manning, then you wouldn't get into an argument. So we don't want people debating and discussing the issues of this case. That would be really bad. And the other thing was that he led on to the fact that the government, and you maybe presume that this was happening anyways, but they were talking about how they knew that there were going to be 1,600 people there protesting on Saturday. They knew that supporters were going to be there, so they had to make precautions, and they know that people in comments threads of articles are getting very passionate and it's getting heated, and they need to look, and they do threat assessments just to make sure that there's nothing that's going to be happening. So he sort of let on that the decision about the shirts might have been connected to particular individuals who might have been saying very, strong worded language, whatever you want to call it, about the military prosecution and everything. And I don't think the person realized what he was saying, but he was basically exposing that the military is sitting there on a daily basis, trolling through people's comments on the articles that I write, on the posts that the newspapers are publishing, and just really ascribing a lot of importance to statements that supporters are making about it. And that's the danger. We're going back to the national security state. So to get questions from you all, just the fact that someone in particular could be denied access to the trial because of what they said in the comments thread of a post, and that is a very real thing that could happen because they are keeping watch.
Yeah.